welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, you may know him from... Oh my God, just like a bunch of snow came crashing down from the window. You probably heard that in the background. You may know him from his incredible solo records. You may know him from Dead Boy and the Elephant Man. You may know him from Agents of Oblivion, or you may know him from Acid Bath. Dax Riggs is on the show today, and you are in for a very interesting conversation. More on that in 1 second. But first, if you want to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, Tristan Abraham, and he will get the message to me. You can find me on Instagram, where I post some videos that I make at Left for Damian. You can also find a Turned Out a Punk Instagram page, a Facebook page, a YouTube page, and a TikTok page where all these edits and videos that I make to promote this show and whatnot go up there, and occasionally other stuff too. And that's the best way to follow the show. I play in a band. We are called Fucked Up. You can find out more information at fuckedup.cc. We have a new EP on Sub Pop Records coming out that you can find out more information over at subpoprecords.com about, or over at fuckedup.cc. And it is I'm pretty happy with this single. Check it out if you are so inclined. And, the best way to support the show. The best way to support the show is tell all your friends about it. Let them all know that you enjoy this podcast. And that will be that. All right, on to today's show. As I said off the top, today on the show, the great Dax Riggs is here. You may know Dax from all his projects over the years, but you may also know him from Acid Bath. Acid Bath is one of those bands, like Dystopia, that has just grown unbelievably in popularity since their, I guess, sad demise following the unbelievably devastatingly tragic death of their bass player in 1997. They were a band in the 90s that I was a fan of. They were a band that I've kind of always liked and enjoyed, but it was really, I was hanging out at Emissions Records in Toronto and talking to some people there, and we were talking about Acid Bath, and they were talking about how unbelievable this band was, and I went back home and sat down and listened to them again, and I underrated this band. Like, I was prone to say that I enjoyed Dax's solo records more than Acid Bath, and I'm not underselling Dax's solo records at all. His new EP is fantastic. I'm a huge fan, but going back and re-listening to When the Kite String Pops, I can see why this band has become so legendary. And of course, the second record, also Pagan Terrorism Tactics, is fantastic as well, but there's something about their sound that's, my God, this band is, whew, this is some hot stuff, these records. So getting the chance to sit down and talk to Dax is awesome, and I'm very glad I got to do it. This is a shorter episode, but there's a lot of wild stories in it, and a little bit more kind of the lore to add to the mystique around Dax and Acid Bath and everything, as you'll hear in this episode. I got to say, once again, check out this new Dax solo EP, his first one that he's done in like 15 years, 7 songs for Spiders. It is, as I said, it is a great continuation, and I tell him about this in the episode, but to me, he's always been sort of this like kind of auteur artist where you can see from, I've never heard Corruption, but you can see from his early stuff all the way through to what he's doing now, sort of a through line. And I don't know why I'm trying to pad this out and make it longer in the intro. Go out, pick up this EP, and if you are fortunate enough to check out Acid Bath on one of these reunion dates, please enjoy them for me, because my God, I Hate God and Acid Bath would be, that would get me out of the house for sure. Also, just as a heads up, we do talk about some pretty heavy topics in this episode in terms of John Wayne Gacy and serial killer stuff, and not to undercut the horrific crimes of any of these people. And hear the art contextualized. Because at first, I got to admit, when I was a younger person, seeing that John Wayne Gacy painting on the cover of that record, I dismissed it for a very long time, and it was something that I eventually came back to and sat down and listened to, and as I said, was a fan of. But yeah, going back and re-listening to this record, if this art has kept you from listening to this record since the '90s, which it probably might have me, go back and listen to this record because holy, this thing is the music on this thing is unreal. When the Kite String Pops, I'm talking about here, but Pagan Terrorism Tactics as well, and Dax Solar. I don't know. I'm just keep padding this thing out in this intro. Dax and I talked for like a bunch after too. Like we talked to a bunch of Cleveland punk stuff and should have been recording that too. Man, this could have been a much longer episode. All right, I got nothing more to add now. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Dax Riggs on Turned Out a Punk. Dax, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as I told you off air, this is a huge honor because I'm a big fan of not just, your solo stuff, but obviously the bands that came before. And I feel like I've heard you in interviews kind of allude to a lot of punk rock stuff. And I feel like a lot of times the interviews don't really follow up on it. So I'm glad I get a chance to really dig into that side of your life.
Oh yeah, it's an important side of my musical life. The influence for sure.
Well, I got to start it off the way they all start off, which is Dax, how'd you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
Hmm. I don't exactly. I just remember the first bands that we had that we liked, the Misfits, Black Flag, The Exploited, and then like the Sex Pistols and Dead Kennedys early on, you know.
You grew up in Indiana first, right? You were born in Indiana?
Right.
So you were getting into music there before moving down south?
Yeah, totally. I was like a thrash metal kid of like 11, 12. Iron Maiden, and then like the whole thrash, every just, Heathen to, Exodus, everybody, all that stuff.
Would
So
would you have heard of like the Zero Boys at that point, or were they kind of a little more obscure?
obscure. I never heard any punk rock until I moved to Louisiana. And there were some kids that hung out with Acid Bath that were total punks. And they were like some of our best friends, like, and they turned us on to the Crucifix, which we loved, and Dead Kennedys and everything, and the Sex Pistols, of course.
Yeah, it's wild because I do hear that in the acid bath. Like it really does come across as like the punk rock stuff, and it's almost like. Well, it's funny. Randy from Lamb of God was just on the podcast, and we were talking about sort of this second wave of American crossover that kind of happens in the mid '90s into the late '90s, where instead of bands playing metal because they wanted to get famous, bands were just playing extreme music, and it was coming from punk rockers again. And this whole kind of next wave of like stuff that would take over the metal world was really coming out of underground scenes and sort of this convergence of punk again.
Yeah, I think we were kind of a mashup of some people that were really into that, and then others that were, more metal. So totally.
So, what was the sort of first shows you remember going to live, like first bands?
Um, well, Exhorder, that was like the most dangerous, exciting thing I'd ever seen at that time. But just vicious, punk, thrash. Let's see, other bands. I probably saw like Nirvana, Metallica, The Cult, like before I was playing music and, so it was almost like there was nothing out there where we were, you know?
I think Nirvana and the Cult definitely are like, I guess, post punk in the sense they were, came out of punk rock all those bands, right? Like there's like
Right, yeah, yeah,
a
true.
current that runs through it all.
Hmm.
Was Shell Shock still playing when you moved down to Louisiana?
I've only ever heard of them. See, that was like I moved to like south, like much more south.
Hmm.
So my trips to New Orleans were only only to go wild as a kid on, in the quarter. I would just it was like an hour uh I lived like an hour south of New Orleans. But I did hear like eventually the first band we ever heard, like me and my, you know, 12, 13, I feel like 13, but maybe we were older, but the first band we heard was Crowbar from that scene. We were like really into that first Crowbar, just as like we were kids in high school, when we heard it. I'm pretty sure. Or maybe should have been in high school, well, but yeah. And that's pretty punk.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that first one.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's something so punk about the music that was kind of coming out of at all points in New Orleans. Like it's such a rich history of punk and underground music from that.
Yeah, there's always, I guess even when we were playing back then, there was always like this other scene going on constantly that we weren't really part of, but there was a very vibrant kind of punk scene constantly going on. And so, there was I Hate God and other punkish type metal bands.
Yeah, like it feels like that's the thing about punk is it can happen anywhere at any time. And I think that's why there's always going to be a punk scene somewhere because there's always going to be a bunch of kids that are like, we don't really know how to play yet necessarily, but we're passionate. So let's go figure it out
And
and
really
do
the
this.
early, like Soylent Green too.
Yeah.
Pretty wild. Like, I mean, of course it's all wild, but if you listen to the very early stuff when there was hardly no one else around doing anything, it's extremely out there, you know? Like it's like punk metal melted, like.
There's there's something also that's consistent I find in all the scenes is sort of like the hard partying side of uh I get maybe Louisiana and whole, certainly New Orleans in my experience, even when I was straight edge. It really is like I don't know, it's a city with an edge.
I would totally agree. I think it's something that I have like never really been aware of just because but when I step away from it and talk with other more normal people, they see it for what it is, a wild thing.
I find it with Austin too. Like there's a some of the wildest times I've ever had have been in Austin. And when people party in Austin, they party crazy hard.
True. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Do you think it probably is like port cities, border cities? Is that the commonality there that stuff's coming in there easier? Or certainly the cannabis history in New Orleans is very rich going back to like cannabis first sort of arriving in America.
Yeah, I guess it's always been a party destination. And so the things that grow out of that can be wild, I guess. And Texas or Austin for sure. I mean, I guess it's just all this acid, it's just drenched or that's the vibe, from the 70s or 80s and but yeah, it's a very like you're right when it's like big parties.
I think going back to the 60s with Austin too, right? Like 13th floor elevators and like,
That's what I lived there for a while and they had Towns Van Zandt there and Rocky Erickson eating acid together, like maybe running in the same circles and like it's really interesting. I love them both dearly.
I think it's interesting how it affects the art that comes out of these places. Cause like you look at Rocky Erickson and then you look at the band the big boys, and then you look at a band like, I don't know, even like Iron Age or something. There's like a weird psychedelic acid edge to all
Like
of
they,
them.
yeah, like they were baked in the sun, kind of. What is the band there was another, the band Billy Miller had before he joined Rockies.
American Flag or Electric Flag?
No, it he was the electric harpsichord player and for the evil one, and he had this band called God damn it, Cold Cold Sun.
Oh, okay. Yes, I have heard of Cold Sun.
It is so heavy, so psychedelic. It's fantastic. Couldn't recommend it more highly. It's like 13th floor elevators type level stuff.
Well, and Janis Joplin's coming out of there too, right? Like well, it's just the birthplace of, I guess, psychedelic music.
Right, they have the moving sidewalks and you know, yeah, Rocky.
And I think in the same way, and I don't mean to lump, where obviously the town you're from with New Orleans in this into the one sort of mega Louisiana thing, but I think the bands that kind of get lumped into that scene or coming out of that scene, there's a commonality that's very regional. Like something that's being erased today because I don't think you see as much regional diversity in music as you used to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, the people grow up here and there's a different kind of music happening here. There's like a funky music that is just constantly around you. And it's just like you can't go back from that. I feel like that has a little bit of something in it. Even the most blackened metal or whatever from it seems like they have a little bit of something, rhythm that this place has, like the funkiness, something. Not all of them. Some of them hate that, so they're not gonna sound that, but like that. But I think it's in the best of it, in my opinion.
And there's almost something like anti-commercial running throughout this because it doesn't have, I guess, the regional pressure that you would have in like a Los Angeles or in a New York, because not to diminish anyone's aspirations, but you're not supposed to make it out of these scenes. There's not like a music industry set up to benefit you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was more or less just like, wow, we made a record. That was the thing. It wasn't anything, the fact that we were making a record and it was going to be available was the world, to us at that time. And I think most of those bands felt like that too, because there was only a handful of bands that was coming around where we were making records. It was Crowbar, Exhorter, I Hate God, pretty much first in line, and then, you know, the others.
Well, now, because I was thinking about Rotten Records and like why you guys wound up on Rotten Records, but it's like, where would a band like Acid Bath exist at that point? Like, there's not a lane.
We were rejected by like Roadrunner. They came down and like the people that came to see us were so enthusiastic that they just like stormed the stage kind of and was like, sign this band. And like this like the waitress got her leg broken and it was just and they were just no, these guys are a wreck. We're yeah. So then
Well, it's too real, I guess, for the music industry at that point. It's like it's not it's not like a Guar. Not to diminish also Guar's craziness off stage as well. Yeah, amazing band.
um right. I think we were just, and we were I don't know, whatever, yeah, we didn't seem like the package deal that they were looking for, like the so but it all worked.
Oh, definitely, because I think that is well, no, I don't think it. I mean, unfortunately for you guys during that time, because I think what it did allow is this sort of band to be discovered by generations of kids to come afterwards, where it wasn't And I feel it goes with like so many bands, I would say from that time period that just were fumbled by labels or maybe on the wrong label that it's just like, oh, if this band had been positioned right, I don't want to sound crass about it, but
Well, I've definitely said the same thing. If we would have had more of an infrastructure there to like help us facilitate, writing songs and making records, but it just wasn't to be, at the time. So, you know,
you bring up that infrastructure. I think that infrastructure is like so underestimated, especially in underground music. Like you look at the artists that are kind of canonized and have been celebrated since day one. There are these bands that have these great infrastructures behind them, like Dead Kennedys having Alternative Tentacles, Minor Threat having Discord, uh, Youth Brigade having BYO. Like I think these allowed them to kind of like build their own legacies, and obviously they did hard work to do it, but not everyone had those labels.
right. Yeah. Not to, yeah. Some people have a relationship where they go and have some altercation with their label and the police are called and they're escorted off the premises. It's that kind of situation.
Yeah, yeah, which is unfortunately, yeah, the reality I think with like you mentioned the trade-off that comes with some bands having to put out records. Like Daryl Jennifer from the Bad Brains, when he was on the podcast, talked about how the Bad Brains not having the economic means to kind of put out their own records were forced to kind of sign these Faustian deals with these shady record labels where they didn't always have proper control of their stuff years later, or they were not necessarily put out in the best way back then.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's like a game of chess, figuring out how to get your stuff.
Your first band was Corruption, right?
Option, is that what we called it?
I read an interview with you from 2013. It was in Florida too.
Well, oh yeah, yeah. Okay, yes. You're absolutely right. I'm like, damn, I don't even remember this, but yeah, it was like it was like when I was like 13 years old. And I met some guys. Well, I met a guy in Louisiana who was also like a teenage like thrash head. And so he was like, "Hey, move to Florida with me and we'll start a thrash band." And so I did, but we it wasn't like a real band. We did play a lot of like we played like a lot of songs, but just like a party or two. So it's not really like a band, but
Where in Florida were you?
Gulf Breeze.
Were there any bands coming through there? Because obviously that's like a crazy vibrant place for music then too.
No, we were just totally just some kids living in a house working at like a little telemarketing place. It was pretty weird, but it was fun.
It's wild because I have a 15-year-old now,
Right.
and I
People
can't imagine him.
no, people and it's like I guess I was like yeah, I pretty much just took off, like I was like 13, like for a while and then I came back and then I tried some other band and then around ninth grade, I met the acid bath guys. Like I quit school and then just pretty much moved in with them, like hung out with them.
So that is that like the Golgotha? Sorry, Golgotha?
Golgotha, yeah, that's
Yeah.
when, or I think we had some other name too, but yeah, that's what like before we got Sammy and Audie, we had a different guitar player and bass player, and we were a lot more like thrashy, a lot like psychedelic thrash music, I would say.
It's interesting because like I went back and I listened to those all the demos that I could find out there, and it's sick. And you've got that sound. Like I know it's different than what Acid Bath, and obviously Acid Bath is very amorphous and changes, but you've got that sound figured out as like a teenager.
You know, I've always been really drawn to creating stuff, you know? Like I always like I was just compelled to try to write lyrics or pick up a guitar and try to write a song. I don't know how to play guitar, but you know, I don't know. It's like a compulsion that is very fulfilling to me too. I guess I have moments of like, you know, where am I like I just feel, goosebumps or something like that, I guess, you know. So I'm always shooting for it. It's always like it's like a thrill, to create things for me.
I read somewhere that you talked about how Boiled Angel and Answer Me and kind of that sort of, zine culture of the 90s was like an influence on you lyrically and stuff. Where were you kind of hearing about these things or finding these
That
zines?
was the punk rock kids that we hung out with in Acid Bath. They had a band called Satanist for Christ. And they
Yes.
did a lot of great covers, and they had their own original songs that were wildly extreme. Me and Sammy were like honorary members of the band, but uh, they had their own band eventually. But they never they opened up for us. They actually had the FBI come and talk to us and stuff back then, which was really frightening, uh, because they would leave these little pamphlets out, with all these ideas of how to like, you know, call the police on your neighbor, and then when the police show up, drop a rock on his head, and leave Christian pamphlets around the scene of the crime. Fucking FBI came and talked to. Well, I hid in the back of the trailer, while Mike talked to the FBI.
It's amazing how much time the FBI seemingly had on their hands in the 90s to investigate punk and hardcore kids and different bands. Like I'd love to do a Freedom of Information Act request on all these files on just record labels and zines and
I guess somebody just complained about, some little pamphlets that they left around one of the few gigs that they ever played. It's not like they were playing much, but scared the fucking FBI.
do you remember that film Human Guinea Pig, the Japanese
Oh yeah, I
film?
love him. Uh, I have all his comics. Hino Hiradeshi.
That, okay, you know more better than I do, but do you remember how like
Well, I don't know much about his movies at all. I just know his comics, which I would recommend.
well, that I guess the legend was that Charlie Sheen saw a bootleg copy of I think it's the second film in the series.
He thought it was real.
He thought it was real and called the FBI,
Okay.
and they had to release the making of footage
Okay.
afterwards.
I had heard that story. Yeah.
It's a bizarre intersection to think of Charlie Sheen and Japanese art having a coexistence at some place.
Right. It's weird that I'm such a big fan of his, but not his films.
His films are a little hard to take. I remember watching that Human Guinea Pig thing, and I was working at a video store that had a lot of pretty extreme films at the time, being like, this might be where
Yeah.
I get off. And then August Underground came out, and I was like, I think I'm out.
Yeah. His comics are a lot different. They're almost like cheerful, like they're very cute, like all the images are very cute, but it's very, very disturbing stuff. It's hard to explain.
It's interesting in Japanese
But I guess
pop
it's
culture.
almost Disney-ish looking. Like it's very like the White Lion, that original old anime.
Yeah,
It's like that. Like everything's real round and cute, but it's very like disgusting too.
you see that a lot, I guess, in Japanese pop culture, where you have like almost these people living dual lives with their art. I guess less so with that, but like Beat Takeshi doing Takeshi's Castle, where he's doing this like weird game show and then doing these crazy gangster films at the same time, or Takeshi Miike, who does these weird cutesy films and then does Audition or uh, uh Fudo or something.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, this guy's like a samurai, like Hideshi, like in all the photographs, he's decked out in like traditional like samurai garb, with the sword and everything. It's pretty cool.
Were you into Japanese punk at all or Japanese hardcore?
No, I never really a lot of comics and but no, never really I'm unaware of it. Yeah.
You should check out Gizem. They're this sort of fascinating band that I think, judging by some of the other things that you said you're into, I think you might find it like a wormhole to kind of investigate with this band because they're a band that sonically is all over the map. Like definitely extreme in what they're doing, but the lore and the mystique around this band that would attack their audiences with flamethrowers or poison the water supply at a show or just like all sorts of heinous
Oh,
acts in the name of, I guess, art.
damn. To check it out.
Well, it's interesting to think when people push, the medium of, I guess, playing live to its extreme, and you mentioned confrontational shows, and I guess punk is full of these, like, be it the Mentors or Gigi Allen or, whoever, like the Boom and the Legion of Doom, like these bands that just would attack the audience or just really push the boundaries of what entertainment is and isn't.
Yeah. It's uh it's wild. Um, yeah.
Was the was the art for the record, the Gacy painting, that I've heard that was forced upon you by the label.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've recently had some sort of come to Jesus with it, like it kind of just oozes with like some sort of American like hypocrisy or something, this pillar of society with a clown costume on, I remember weeping when I got it, I was just like, because I thought we were kind of working it, like, I guess in my mind, we were still working on the album cover, but we'd had like some things put together that didn't work, and then it was all of a sudden this was just in the mail. So
There's a book that came out a couple years ago of, I think Jerry Rossi from the band Your Funeral was his like art agent back then, and a book came out. And if she wasn't, I don't mean to credit her with not being, but a book came out listing who had paintings by John Wayne Gacy. And according to the book, Oprah had a John Wayne Gacy painting. Would
huh,
I guess it would make sense for Chicago. Obviously, like she was talking about that, he was on her show, but she is a big art collector, so it all lines up.
right, yeah,
Because you're right, it is part of American.
flesh suit, and you know what I mean, puts on her human flesh suit and goes in the Gacy room. Probably has a few other things in there you'd be interested in.
It is a part of Americana or the sort of like American Gothic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like now I can kind of see it for what it is. At the time, I couldn't. I was not happy with it, but I just felt like it kind of dumbed down what we were doing. So,
I think it probably at the time would have, like you're saying, put your record in a category. Like there was so much of that kind of stuff coming out, and it kind of, yeah, like it definitely was a lot fresher, I guess, for people. So it would have lumped you in with, the Charles Manson records that were being bootlegged around that time, or just like it just not taken as seriously, I guess.
yeah, I guess it was like his actual crimes that were just like, I don't know. Yeah.
With the Kevorkian art, were you involved with selecting that for the artwork?
Actually, that was another one that was kind of pushed on us. But we did have some choice. We chose that one out of a couple of other ones. Yeah. with also kind of like, well, we'll do half like this and then half of this like goat's head that we had like when we played in Mexico, someone bought like a goat's head at the market, and they brought it to a show and we were like, wow. We took a picture of it, and that's on some of the covers for the second record. But that's kind of like what the band wanted. And then the record company was just like, well, we must have some sort of something to talk about. And that's how that went.
It's funny how the aesthetic of a band kind of shapes the way the band's perceived, and it's just once again, like if you had more resources to kind of figure out your aesthetic or to fight the label on some of these choices, would it change the way the music was looked at the time? Like I think now people understand it for what it is and look at it separate from the artwork. But at the time when everyone was relying on music reviews and magazines to decide what
Right.
to buy,
It was a big boon for them to be like, well, now they'll have something to talk to you about when you do these interviews. They can.
yeah. And here we are years later, still talking about it. So they were right. There
That's
was
when,
that. Go on, sorry.
oh, and then I was like, yeah, I guess you were right.
There's that interview with Kevorkian in Answer Me, Jack
Really?
Kevorkian.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it exactly.
It was, I think, Debbie Goad. I forget her last name, beyond Goad, but she pretended to be dying and sort of interviewed him under false pretenses, and then they published that in the zine
Wow.
afterwards.
Awesome.
It's definitely like one of those zines. I think when Margaret Cho was on the podcast, she talked about it as being one of the most influential American publications of the
Oh
20th
yeah.
century.
One of those kids had a couple of those books. And like we lived like the town that like Acid Bath kind of lived in, there was no mall. There was like it's like those size towns, like so to find some stuff like this, we were like, I would just go over there and like copy, just go through the books and copy stuff for like flyers and t-shirts and it kind of seeped into well, we were excited about it. It was a book written for us.
And you look at where pop culture's gone with the true crime stuff, or just the cynicism, or Vice magazine. Like Vice was totally influenced by Answer Me. Like when Sarush was on here, he talked about the influence of that magazine on them.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of like just an un like it just exists like the universe exists like it was just there and I'm like how I've never really been questioned like all that Church of the Subgenius stuff that was in there too was really like we were really into that stuff. Um and I know that Robert Crumb had something to do with it and all these underground cartoonists.
There was a sense of people just doing things because they wanted to do them. There was not necessarily commercial rewards at the end. Like I don't know what the economic reward in the Church of the Subgenius was.
Right, like some videotapes and stuff. Yeah, it was just the thrill of creating that. And what a wild idea it was, just about God and everything.
It was also amazing how far this stuff got. Like that these people were just making things in their basements or in their house somewhere at a Kinko's.
In Texas, I think, where it all came from, or the main guy, I think.
And it's all over the world. And it's just through people tape trading at that point. Like there's no internet to disseminate this. It's just people like being like, you got to see this. Or someone being like, oh, this sounds intriguing. I'm going to send money and order this.
Yeah,
Did you ever tape trade at all?
I
Like,
did. No.
so you're just kind of relying on your network for music discovery?
Yeah, I mean, I would just dig through like bargain bins at the mall. And so, I mean, I guess my musical taste, it kind of went wild like early on where I kind of got into like a lot of 60s music, and then it just, I still am, still like Back from the Grave, that series, and I'm into Brown Acid. Have you
Yes, absolutely. I love those comp series. Like I think there's like something there's
killed?
just like something timeless about all those records. Kill by Death and Back to Front and like there's so many bands that just put a one perfect song or two perfect songs and that's it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, I look also at your musical career and it's almost like an auteur kind of songwriter where it's obviously developed and it's changed what you're doing and your styles have certainly kind of like weaved in and out, but there's like it's the same universe you've been kind of creating since you were a teenager. Even in the new EP, like it's still like this sort of like world building that you've done.
Yeah, I often say that it's the same song, but it's like one long song.
But that's what life is, right? One long song. Right? My mom said I always drew the same face over and over again when I drew pictures. So, um, this has been awesome. And anytime you want to come back on and talk about music or art or anything, you're always welcome here.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.